Hello and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host Kirill, and today we're going to be discussing the foundations of the Romanian nation and answering the question, who are the Romanians? Now, this video is actually going to be the first video in a multi-part series on Romanian history where we discuss basically all of Romanian history starting from antiquity and ending with the end of the 20th century. So we're going to be covering the ancient period, medieval period, the Danubian principalities, the revolutionary era, the formation of the modern Romanian state, the communist period, as well as some related topics such as Moldova and the Moldovans. So originally I was going to do these videos kind of back to back, but I decided against that. So what we're going to do is kind of break up these videos, break up this series, and do kind of one video on Romanian history every month or so. So that way we're going to spread them out throughout the whole year. Instead of kind of doing them all back to back, kind of packed together, I decided kind of spreading them out. It's probably a better way to do this. But without any further ado, let's kind of jump into this first video and start discussing Romanian history during the period of antiquity. Now, if we go back to antiquity and we start searching for the initial building blocks of the modern Romanian nation, if we start looking for the first kind of people that will lead us to the Romanian ethnogenesis, we will find the Dacians. The Dacians are the first major civilization that exists on the territory of modern-day Romania, and that is kind of where this Romanian story begins. So the first question we have to ask is, who were the Dacians and where were they located? In the centuries before the Roman conquest of the early 2nd century AD, the territory bounded roughly by the Danube, Tisa, and the Dniester rivers was home to various Thracian peoples, the most important of whom historically were the Geti and the Dacians. The two were distinct but related peoples, and some historians, from ancient times to the present, have treated them as one, calling them Ghetto-Dacians. In any case, the Geti inhabited the lower Danube basin and had regular commerce with Greek cities along the Black Sea coast, founded as early as the 7th century BC in what is now Dobruja. The histories of Herodotus, written in the 5th century BC, are one of the earliest narrative sources of information about them and refer to them as a Thracian people. The lands of the Dacians lay in the center of the Carpatho-Danubian basin, straddling both sides of the southern Carpathian Mountains. Strabo, in the 1st century BC, tells us that the Dacians spoke the same language as the Geti, and Dio Cassius, some 2 centuries later, pointed out numerous similarities in their cultures. Now here is a map of the Balkans during the Roman period, and this map will help you visualize what this region looks like, what Dacia looks like, and so forth. So if we kind of zoom in here at the bottom, we'll see kind of the more detailed administrative provincial regions of the Roman Empire, but this bigger map will give you kind of a better sense of what's going on. So if we look at the bottom here, we'll see Macedonia, and here again, if you look at the kind of more detailed map, you'll see that Macedonia is divided between two administrative regions, Macedonia Prima in the south and Macedonia Secunda in the north. But nevertheless, that is kind of the general region of Macedonia. To the east of Macedonia, we have Thrace. And to the north of Thrace, we have the region of Mysia in yellow. Mysia Superior in the west and Mysia Inferior to the east. And these will be the three regions that will form the core of the Bulgarian lands later on in the Middle Ages. But that is what kind of the southeastern portion of the Balkans looks like. If we move to the west, we'll see here the regions of Dalmatia and Pannonia. So here in the red, we have Dalmatia, and in the green, we have Pannonia, the Pannonian Plain, modern-day Hungary. But large portions of Dalmatia and Pannonia will form later in the Middle Ages the Kingdom of Croatia, which I did a video about not too long ago. But what is most relevant to this video is the region here up to the northeast in orange, and this is Dacia. And we can see that Dacia lies to the east of the Pannonian Plain and to the north of Mysia, and it is divided, Mysia and Dacia are divided by the Danube River, which forms this border between the two regions. And Again, Dacia is divided in two, Dacia Superior, Dacia Inferior, and those are divided by the Carpathian Mountains. If we zoom in here a little bit, we can see where it says Getae, Getae, and this is the Dacian kind of subgroup that lives closer to the Danubian Basin and to the Black Sea. And if we look further to the west in Dacia Superior, here you will see the Dacian capital of Sarmizegetusa. That is the capital, again, of the Dacians during this period of time. So this map should help you kind of visualize these various regions as we talk about them throughout the remainder of this video. Now, the first great leader that emerges from the Dacians will be a noble by the name of Burebista, who will become king or ruler of the Dacians around the year 82 BC. Now, what Burebista is really known for is expanding these Dacian lands east towards the Black Sea and conquering a lot of the Greek coastal cities that exist on that Black Sea coast in what we call Dobruja. Now, the Dacians, once they conquer these Greek cities, they will benefit greatly from this due to the fact that they will gain access to Greek technology and Greek innovations that they did not have previously. A lot of these Greek artisans, builders, professionals of various types will actually be sent to the Dacian capital of Sarmizegetusa in order to modernize the Dacian capital. And Burebista will eventually expand even further, and this expansion of Burebista will come into conflict with the growing Roman Empire. And these two groups of people, the Dacians and the Romans, will begin having territorial disputes during this time of Burebista, mainly around the Danube River region. As time went on, the hostilities between the Dacians and the Romans would intensify, and a significant reason for this is the fact that Burebista would begin to launch raids even further south across the Danube into Mysia, into Thrace, and begin to threaten these Roman holdings there. Burebista would also kind of inject himself into Roman politics. He would take sides, for example, in the Roman civil war that erupted between Caesar and Pompey. Burebista took the side of Pompey in that conflict due to the fact that Pompey recognized Burebista's conquests on the Black Sea coast. Now, as we all know, Julius Caesar would eventually be assassinated. However, Burebista would also be assassinated pretty shortly thereafter, after Julius Caesar's assassination, and that is really due to certain disputes that Burebista had with Dacian aristocrats, nobles, and so forth. Now, after Burebista's death, this Dacian kingdom that he had built up would begin to fracture without his kind of strong leadership, without him in charge. The kingdom would again fracture and begin kind of breaking up into these smaller, more tribal units, which were ruled over by local lords and so forth. Now, the Dacians would remain kind of disunited and fractured pretty much until the end of the 1st century AD, around 85 AD, when another unifying figure would emerge from the Dacians, that being a man by the name of Decebalus. Now, Decebalus would attempt and would resurrect this Dacian kingdom, which kind of fell along with Burebista previously. And similar to Burebista, Decebalus would again engage the Romans in warfare and attempt to kind of secure the Danubian frontier of his kingdom, and again would start launching raids south across the Danube into the region of Mysia. In 89 AD, after Decebalus has been leading the Dacians for a few years, after he's launched some raids south of the Danube into the Roman territories, he and the Roman emperor at the time, Domitian, will eventually reach an agreement, a peace agreement, to end these hostilities between the two states. What this agreement contemplates is that Dacia will become a Roman vassal, a client state, and in exchange for this status, the Dacians will receive an annual tribute from the Romans, and this agreement will allow a short period of peace between these two states. Dacia, between the reigns of Burebista and Decebalus, reveals itself in the written records and in archaeological remains to have been a complex society divided into two main classes, aristocracy and commoners. It was from the former that the kings and leading officials and the clergy came, while the mass of the population supplied labor and taxes. This majority was largely rural and lived in village communes, which had collective responsibility for taxes and labor services to the king, such as the maintenance of fortifications. Urban life was nevertheless well developed. Sarmizegetusa possessed the attributes of a true city, and it was a significant artisan and commercial center, besides being the seat of royal administration. The economy was based on agriculture, which provided most of the inhabitants with their main source of income. The main crops were grains, wheat, barley, and millet. But mining, especially of iron, gold, silver, and salt, and artisan crafts, such as metals, ceramics, glass, and masonry, were well developed. Dacian artisans thus produced a variety of weapons and tools, and products of all kinds for daily life. Influences from both the Roman and Hellenistic worlds were evident in the forms and decorations they chose, influences that were strengthened by a flourishing commerce. In return for processed goods and luxuries, such as perfumes and lotions, which were intended for the upper classes, the Dacians sent to the Danube and Black Sea coastal cities grains and animal products, salt, wood, honey, and wax. This trade seems to have been in the hands of foreign, not Dacian merchants. By the reign of Decebalus, the Dacians had achieved a level of civilization well suited to their needs. In architecture, especially in some 80 fortresses and numerous religious sanctuaries that archaeologists have identified, they gave evidence of a solid knowledge of mathematics and engineering. They possessed a written language, and in a few specimens that have survived, mainly inscriptions and an occasional word or two from Greek and Latin authors, they used the Greek and Latin alphabets. In religion, according to Herodotus, the Geti practiced the cult of Zamolxus, a priest who, according to tradition, had been a disciple of Pythagoras and had returned to his native land to serve the Dacian supreme god, Gebelesis, and preach the immortality of the soul. Other, later sources present Zamolxus as a god himself and suggest that the Geti knew how to make themselves immortal through secret rituals. Yet information about the religion of the Geti and the Dacians is so fragmentary that greater precision about beliefs and practices is difficult. Now, this relative autonomy that the Dacians enjoy based on the aforementioned agreement between them and the Romans, that autonomy will come to an end when the Emperor Trajan comes to power in 98 AD. And the Roman Emperor Trajan will take a much more aggressive stance towards the Dacians. And the reason for this is he wants to make sure that the boundary between the Dacians and the Romans is fully secured, and that the Dacians will not be able to launch any future raids south of the Danube into the regions of Mysia and Thrace and so forth. Additionally, and maybe more importantly, is the fact that Trajan is very interested in the agricultural and mineral wealth of the Dacians. So with all that in mind, it will be Trajan who breaks the peace, and he will launch a massive military campaign north of the Danube into the Thracian lands at the turn of the 2nd century AD in the year 101. Now, what these Roman legions do is they will construct bridges to cross the Danube at various points, and they will march on the Dacian capital. Outside of Sarmizegetusa, the Dacian capital, the Roman legions will meet the Dacian forces, and the Dacian forces will be decisively defeated. Decebalus, the Dacian leader, will surrender, and he will accept very harsh Roman terms in exchange for peace. Essentially, Decebalus will agree to a loss of territory, loss of political sovereignty. He will be forced to destroy certain fortresses, Dacian fortresses, and he will be forced to accept the fact that a Roman garrison will be stationed in his capital. Now, obviously, the Dacians and Decebalus are displeased with this entire situation, and Decebalus will very shortly thereafter attempt to form an anti-Roman alliance and will attempt to remilitarize the Dacians in order to push back against the Romans and push back against Trajan. Obviously, this greatly upsets the Roman Emperor Trajan, who will launch a merciless campaign against the Dacians in the year 105 AD, which will result in a total Dacian defeat, and Decebalus will be forced to take his own life instead of accepting surrender.
He says, "Fool me once, shame on you." It fooled me. We can't get fooled again.
Once Dacia is fully conquered by the Romans, we will see a very thorough process of Romanization take place. And what occurs in Dacia after the Dacian Wars is actually very similar to what occurred in Macedonia after the Macedonian Wars. And that is, once the Roman Empire conquers those territories, it will begin to import subjects, Roman citizens, to settle in those territories in order to hasten this process of Romanization. And what this practice is meant to do is, one, bring in people who already speak Latin, who already practice Roman culture, customs, and so forth, which will, again, kind of accelerate this process of Romanization. But what it also does is it kind of acts as a form of demographic warfare, which is meant to undermine the old culture, the old civilization, whether it's Macedonian or Dacian, to destroy those cultures and to fully Romanize the Dacians and the Macedonians who lived in those territories prior. The province of Dacia underwent a steady Romanization between Trajan's conquest and the withdrawal under Emperor Aurelian. During these nearly 165 years, Dacia was integrated into the complex structures of the Roman Empire. Its institutions of government, its laws and judicial system, all the branches of its civilization, and its Latin language lay at the social and economic foundations and shaped the mental climate of the province. The chief bearers of this new order of things were the colonists. Ethnically and by social category, they were in almost infinite diversity. First in power and social standing were the governors and the commanders of the legions and their intermediate subordinates and the wealthy merchants and businessmen. Next came the artisans and shopkeepers, the legionaries, and the veterans, then the farmers, and finally the laborers and slaves. By the beginning of the 3rd century, a sizable minority of the population of Roman Dacia was composed of newcomers. They had arrived from all parts of the Roman world, from Britain to the Near East. Yet, however different their origins, they were united by their sense of belonging to the empire and by their common Latin language. Now, this direct Roman rule over the Dacians will actually last less than 2 centuries, and that is due to the fact that the Romans will incur great costs in defending that territory from raids by various peoples from the north. Essentially, you have various quote-unquote barbarian tribes that will raid and invade the region of Dacia, people such as the Goths, and the Romans will find that it is very hard to defend the northern boundaries of Dacia from these various barbarian raids, and the Romans will eventually decide to just withdraw south of the Danube and use the Danube as a much more secure frontier against these various barbarian peoples from the north. Unrelenting attacks against Dacia by the Carps and Goths, and the difficulties of defending extended and exposed frontiers led to a partial withdrawal from northern and eastern Dacia under Gallienus. It brought no improvement in security, and Aurelian, at the beginning of his reign, probably in 271 AD, moved the army and civil administration to south of the Danube, which henceforth was to serve as the empire's defensive bulwark, protecting its Balkan provinces. As the Romans begin to withdraw south of the Danube and abandon the Dacian territories, we will see that Dacia will begin losing its Roman character over time. Even major cities like Sarmizegetusa will fall into urban decay, and Dacia will become a very rural society after the Romans leave. Basically, local village life will be the most common form of life as the cities kind of empty out. And along with that, you will see a lot of the Roman traditions, Roman culture begin to die out as well. Now, consequently, due to the fact that the Romans have more or less abandoned the area, these various barbarian tribes, which we discussed, they will begin to fill the vacuum by moving in. And by the 4th century AD, we will see pretty significant barbarian incursions into these Dacian territories. The Goths moved southward from the Baltic regions and settled in the area between the southern Carpathians and the Danube about 332 AD as auxiliaries of the Romans. They gave way to the Huns, who attacked them in 376, forcing them south of the Danube, from where they eventually made their way to Italy, sacking Rome in 410. The Huns, by 420, were well settled in the territory north of the mouth of the Danube, and relentlessly extended their control over what would become Moldavia and Wallachia in the 14th century, and further to the west, Oltenia. In 454, with their center now in Pannonia, they were defeated by a coalition of Germanic tribes, one of which, the Gepids, a branch of the Goths, settled in Transylvania. Then the Avars replaced the Gepids in Transylvania around 567, making numerous settlements along the middle course of the Maros River. The multi-ethnic Avar Khaganate, encompassing Gepids, Slavs, and Romanized populations, covered a vast territory stretching from the steppe north of the Black Sea to the Alps. Of all these migrations, that of the Slavs left the deepest impression on the Dacio-Romans. Coming from the north, they reached the territory east of the Carpathians in the first half of the 6th century, and then began to settle in eastern Wallachia and slowly moved westward into Transylvania. Slavic tribes continued to move southward, crossing the Danube into the northern Balkans in 602. They were well established between the Danube and the Balkan Mountains when the Bulgarians, a Turkic people, arrived in the region from the steppe north of the Black Sea. In 680, they crossed the lower Danube and established their capital at Pliska, in present-day northeastern Bulgaria. In the course of the next century, the Bulgarian ruling elites underwent a gradual assimilation by the more numerous Slavs, a process sufficiently complete by the 10th century to allow us to speak of Bulgarians. Of crucial importance was the conversion of Tsar Boris I to Christianity in 864. By this time, the Bulgarian state had expanded north of the Danube as far as the Tisa River, and had absorbed most of the present-day Romania, a movement facilitated by the collapse of the Avar realm after defeats by the armies of Charlemagne between 791 and 796. This first Bulgarian empire reinforced Slavic influences among the Dacio-Romans. But north of the Danube, unlike the course of events to the south, the Slavs were assimilated by the Dacio-Romans. Although the Slavs certainly had a significant presence in Romania, their culture, language never became dominant there, and that is likely because the Dacian lands, later the Romanian lands, would be essentially a transit area for the Slavs who were moving further south. Essentially, Dacia, Romania, however you want to think of it at this time, is not really a destination. It is, again, a kind of a transit zone where the Slavs are moving from their homeland to the north around, Belarus, Ukraine, and moving south of the Danube towards the more wealthy Roman cities, which they are seeking to raid and conquer and so forth. Essentially, Romania at this time, especially post-Roman period, is very de-urbanized. It is lacking in a lot of the riches that the Roman cities south of the Danube are not lacking in, and therefore Romania is not really a destination for the Slavs. They are just kind of passing through that area in order to siege the Roman cities that exist along the Aegean and Adriatic coasts. If you want a kind of modern example of this to help you kind of visualize what's going on, if we look kind of in the past decade or so, we will see a lot of Middle Eastern migrants moving into Europe, and they're not moving into the Balkans or Central Europe. They're going to the more wealthy parts of Western Europe, France, Germany, etc. And here we see kind of that phenomenon occurring where there's a gap between the homeland and the ultimate destination, and that area in between, in this case the Balkans and Central Europe, is a transit zone that they're passing through, not a place that they're settling per se. And that's the same thing that's happening with the Slavs. They're moving from their homeland into north, south of the Danube, towards the more wealthy parts of the Roman Empire, and kind of using the Dacian/Romanian lands as a transit area. That's why we're not seeing a whole lot of there is Slavic influence there, but not as much as there would be, again, in regions that would become Bulgaria, Macedonia, Serbia, Croatia, and so forth, which is why we kind of see a gap between the Eastern Slavs and the Southern Slavs. Additionally, throughout this entire period, kind of the early Middle Ages, we will also see Christianity begin to take a very firm foothold in these Dacian Romanian lands as well. During these obscure centuries, Christianity established itself among the inhabitants of Old Dacia. Yet the evidence is sparse. Christians were certainly among the colonists and legionaries who came to Dacia after Trajan's conquest, but persecutions to which Roman authorities subjected Christians must have impeded the spread of the new faith and discouraged the organization of communities. The earliest significant archaeological remains attesting to the presence of Christians in Dacia date from the 4th century. Evidence of Christianity in early Dacia also comes from the Romanian language. Many words relating to Christianity are of Latin origin, especially those concerning the fundamental ideas of the faith. The extension of the First Bulgarian Empire north of the Danube and across the Carpathians in the 9th century brought formal church institutions, the Slavic Byzantine Rite, and Slavic as the official language of the church. Events attested to by the large number of Slavic words in Romanian relating to worship and ecclesiastical organization. The Slavic connection thus established was crucial in turning the Dacio Romans to the east. Now, the question that we're left with after all this, and one of the most controversial aspects of Romanian history, is that of ethnic continuity. How much ethnic continuity do we have throughout this entire period? We started with the Dacians, who were then Romanized, then de-Romanized, and we have post-Roman incursions by Slavs, Goths, other peoples. And the question then remains, how much continuity was there between the old Dacians and the people who ended up living in those territories in the early Middle Ages around the end of the first millennia AD? Despite serious gaps in our knowledge, the Romanian language nonetheless offers intriguing clues about the process of formation of the Romanian people. First of all, Romanian is a Latin language, as its morphology, syntax, and vocabulary of most frequently used words demonstrate. Its Latin character, then, suggests the depths and the pervasiveness of Romanization to which the populations north and also south of the Danube were subjected. By contrast, the Dacian element in Romanian is modest and in fact difficult to measure, since little of the Dacian language has survived. The second most important element in Romanian after Latin is Slavic. Although it has some effect on the structure and phonetics of Romanian, its exercise is greatest influenced on the vocabulary. The number of frequently used Slavic words in Romanian suggests that the Dacio-Romans and Slavs lived together for an extended period of time before the Romanian language had been fully formed, and before the Slavs north of the Danube had been assimilated by the more numerous Dacio-Romans. The Slavic element in Romanian was reinforced later by the expansion of the First Bulgarian Empire, north of the Danube and across the Carpathians, before and after the conversion of Tsar Boris to Christianity in 864. It was the form of Slavic brought by the Bulgarians, that is, Medio-Bulgarian, based on the language spoken around Salonika in the 9th century, that was the source of numerous Slavic words in Romanian relating to church life, ritual, and the hierarchy. Medio-Bulgarian, using the Cyrillic alphabet, became the official language of the Orthodox Church and of the princely chancellaries in the principalities of Moldavia and Wallachia when they were formed in the 14th century. Romanian scholars in general accept 1000 AD as the date roughly marking the emergence of the Romanian ethnic community, a combination of Roman, Slavic, and Dacian populations. They argue that henceforth we may speak of Romanians.